Okay, it's me again. We're still in the week of April 4th through April 8th. Today is Thursday, April 7th. The first thing you need to do is turn in your completed crossover theme analysis. You're going to turn in that entire PDF from Notability, this one, with your typed out analysis here, as well as your outline, brainstorming, and so forth. Before you turn it in, make sure you did this part as well. You used at least 2 transition words or phrases in your analysis, okay? And you're turning it in here. When you're done turning it in, you're going to move on to our poetry assignment. Now, the poetry assignment is a performance task grade, and writing poetry does not take as long as writing an essay, so we only have 2 days in class to do this. Let's put this PDF into the Create section of Notability and go over it together. So here is where I want your creativity to get flowing, okay? We are writing a poem using the instructions and guidelines below. Make sure to read the rubric and look at the examples before you start writing. So let's look at the guidelines first. We have to choose a subject or topic to focus on. Now, what does that mean exactly? It basically just means, like, let's not write a random poem about just, like, oh, I don't know. Y'all know how you guys are. Make sure that there's actually like a focus. So if you're writing about school, make the whole poem about school. If you're writing about like your family, make sure the reader can tell like, oh, this is a poem about their family. I think the purpose here is for it to not just be like a random jumble of like words and sentences put together. It just has to have focus. So whatever your topic is, focus on it, the entire poem. Next, choose one of the 4 types of poems to write. So when we took notes on poetry, we went over that there are 4 types of poetry. There's narrative, concrete, free verse, lyrical. You're going to choose one of these 4 types. Narrative tells a story, does not have to rhyme. Concrete poems form a shape or movement related to the poem, also does not have to rhyme. Free verse does not follow consistent rhythm or rhyme scheme. Lyrical expresses personal emotions, often includes a refrain, chorus, usually rhymes. So whatever it is you are going to do, circle it. It must have at least 3 stanzas. Each stanza should have at least 3 lines. So remember, a stanza is a group of lines in the poem. Your group of lines should be 3 lines. That should be very clear. Must use at least 3 different types of figurative language. 3 different types. So not 3 similes, 3 different types. So you can have a simile, metaphor, personification, or maybe onomatopoeia, hyperbole, simile. Whatever it is you choose, 3 different types. You guys should know the figurative language by now. The only one we didn't really annotate for was sensory language. And that's because you naturally do these things when you're writing, and it appeals to one of your 5 senses. So if you want like to talk about like visual things or taste or sense of smell, that could be one of your types of figurative language as well. Let's look at the rubric. There are 3 criteria: organization, elements of poetry, grammar usage, and spelling. So if you want full credit on this, the poem follows the format of one of the 4 types of poetry. It has 3 stanzas, 3 lines at least, and it enables the reader to think about the subject that they chose in a deeper, more interesting way. So the way that's phrased is very specific. It's not just a random poem about like with words that rhyme and there's no real focus. It's challenging the reader to think in a deeper, interesting way about whatever topic that you chose, if you want full credit for that. Next, elements of poetry. At least 3 examples of figurative language are used that create vivid images that contribute significantly to the meaning of the poem. Word choice is vivid and exact. throughout. So vivid just means like you chose words that like were very expressive. So it's not just like basic words and terminology. It really like you are helping the reader to visualize something. And then lastly, grammar, spelling, mechanics. There are few or no errors in grammar and spelling. Okay, you would lose points here if the poem is difficult to understand at times because of errors in grammar and spelling. So as long as there are just a couple of errors, you should get full credit on that. Here are some examples of each type of poem from the crossover. So a narrative poem tells a story. So here's an example from the crossover where Josh is telling a narrative poem about his brother Jordan, how he's like a baller, that his favorite player is Michael Jordan, and kind of making fun of him for this obsession with Michael Jordan. That's telling us a story. Then we have a concrete poem, and it's about Josh dribbling on the court, and we can see how the poem like moves. So he's moving and grooving, and then it goes like this, crisscrossing, flossing, slipping. So it's following movement of dribbling on a court. So that's a concrete poem. And concrete poem, it really is about the way it looks. So maybe you want to have like things in all caps. Maybe you want things in italics. Maybe you want things that are like split up and spaced out. Just think about the shape and how the poem visually looks like to the reader if you're choosing concrete, okay? Free verse poem, there's no pattern, there's no rhyme to it. So anytime in the crossover book where Josh is giving us like those vocabulary terms and giving us like examples with his as-ins, those were example of free verse poems. Lyrical poems, they tend to rhyme more. They tend to resemble music more. In the crossover, there weren't really like lyrical, like song poetry. This one actually is kind of like a concrete poem, but there was a lot of rhyme. So we used this one as an example of lyric poem just because of the rhymes that we saw here. Ball, fall, mall, ball, brother, lover, cover, drop, mopped, all those top, stop. So when you are thinking of lyrical poem, think of like you're writing a song, because the crossover didn't really have like really good like song lyrical poetry examples. But the main part to think of is that rhyme. Important to note, sometimes the poems in the crossover are a combination of more than one type of poetry. For example, most of the poems in the novel are a mix of narrative and free verse. You can also combine the elements of two types of poetry if you'd like. So for example, like the narrative poem is a mix of free verse and narrative. Maybe you want to do concrete and narrative together, or lyrical and narrative together. The only things that don't go together are lyrical and free verse, because lyrical is all about rhyming and free verse is about not rhyming. So you can do combinations of two types of poetry if you'd like, except for free verse and lyrical. Here's a space for you to brainstorm, and here's where you're going to type out your final poem. You have today and tomorrow to work on this, and it is due tomorrow at midnight. So turn in your poem tomorrow at midnight. If you have any questions, let Mr. Boykin know, and have a wonderful day.